Welcome to this next episode of the Working Wellbeings podcast. In this episode, we speak with Jody Hill. She's the founder of Thrive Law and a truly inspiring voice, advocate and leader in this space. She continually challenges herself and her team to do better and shares openly and honestly her journey from mental breakdown to setting up her own law firm on her own terms. Enjoy. Okay. Welcome. Hi, Matt. Hi, Jodie. Welcome to another episode of the Work Wellbeings podcast. Thank you, Jodie, so much for giving us your time, especially as it's currently, as we record this, the end of a Friday. So we really appreciate that. I guess without further rambles and chit chat from me, I'm just going to hand over straight to Jodie for a quick introduction on who you are.
Oh, nice. Where do I start? Okay, so, now I'm the founder and managing partner at Thrive Law. So I'm a solicitor. I specialise in employment law. But my journey to that was really a bit of a convoluted, unorthodox route to law. I actually started as a barrister, went and cross-qualified, became a solicitor. To cut a long story short, then actually had a mental breakdown and then decided to set my own law firm up. And I suppose throughout that journey, that's kind of shaped who we are as Thrive Law and really the purpose of the practice. It's my why, really. I want to be able to thrive at work, and I want to create cultures and workplaces that are psychologically safe and nice places to work where people can show up as their true self. And so I suppose I have that as my own experience, but also as a solicitor and, knowing the law around discrimination and, the rights and wrongs of how to create those types of workplaces. So, yeah.
Amazing. And you're based up in Leeds, that's right, isn't it?
Yes, so we're based in Leeds. We've got lawyers all over the UK and we're branching out to Dubai at the moment, which is exciting.
Wonderful. And so in terms of that journey then, so coming from sort of an experience that's, very personal to you, that's what really was the catalyst to deciding to shape your own type of business and do work in your own way. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And for me, it was really about I couldn't find a firm that felt like that it fit with my values, and actually that felt as though I'd be safe psychologically because I'd had that breakdown and I knew my vulnerabilities and the environment that I needed to be in. And part of the journey before I actually set the firm up, between having the breakdown, I worked as a consultant on a self-employed basis for various firms. And what I started to realize was having that bit more autonomy over my role and also the flexibility of like when and where I worked actually really helped me in my recovery. And it also helped me to realize that was really a really important part of what I needed to create in this new culture, because demanding that people sit at a desk in an office 9 till 5 is just not conducive to positive mental health for a lot of people. So that was one of the biggest catalysts actually, because actually that learning piece was a really important part of that journey.
Yeah. So can I just jump straight in then to the industry, because I don't want to make assumptions, but we do, I guess, have that stereotype or conception that the legal sector or perhaps professional services might have a slightly tougher environment in terms of that balance between work-life balance and how we can fit in our non-work lives with our work lives. Yeah. Is that true? Is that the case, that there is a challenge there?
I definitely think there's a challenge. And I think part of that is because, especially in law firms, and I think accountancy firms are probably quite similar, we have to account for all of our time. So, because it's very much, we'll time recording what we call units of 6. And so almost every single minute that you're working, you have to account for, and that's got to be billable. So then it's like, well, when do you go to the bathroom? When do you eat? When do you do your admin? So then that eats into our personal lives because we have to work longer days. We end up working evenings, weekends. And especially, I think, since the lockdowns, people have had some flexibility to work from home, but then it's almost like, well, you're not traveling now, so you better work 10 more hours. And it's that kind of that work-life balance has definitely been blurred, even though it can be helpful to obviously work more flexibly, only if it's in a positive way. So I do think that certainly in the legal sector, it's those traditions that how they've always worked. And so for us, it was really about setting a different culture, a different way of billing, a different way of working, and not just focusing on like that person is a number. It's actually, we're a very people-focused, people-first organization. So we lead with values and behaviors rather than focusing purely on the numbers and the profit. They actually come a lot lower in our scoring for the weight that we give to all of the categories that are important within the firm. And we got our team involved in that process as well, because actually I think it's important for the team to understand, yes, we are still a business. Obviously, we have to still make money to pay everybody's salaries, but there's a lot more to it than that. And it's not to the detriment of people's mental health. And I think that's key. A lot of other firms they're not quite there. And I think a lot of firms want to change, but as a sector, there's still this whole thing around billable hours. And I think that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah. Do you think that there's businesses in the sector seeing what you're doing and sort of feeling a little bit uncomfortable for, you exposing that?
Sometimes I do think that definitely comes up, and certainly we've been asked by other firms to support them with the strategy and just with the approach. I think because they've always done it in a certain way, they find it really hard to make the time, because the model that they're in doesn't let them have the time to think about other stuff. Which it's ironic. Yeah. And then the other side of it is actually, they've only ever done it in a certain way, so they don't know how to, they can't even think like, how do we even approach this in a different way? It'll be so difficult to change. Let's just stay as we are. So there are some firms that I've seen that are actually moving away from the billable hours model, where that person isn't just a number, but there's still a lot of firms which are still in that very, very traditional way of accounting for every individual's performance and billing. So yeah, I do think there's definitely a shake-up, and also I think it's interesting to see the regulatory bodies getting involved. So the Law Society and the SRA are doing quite a lot of work in the sector to promote equality, diversity and inclusion, but particularly well-being and mental health, and showing like the importance of investing in that area.
Right. And are you seeing that change then? Because obviously you're seeing significant progress in the way that you're able to run your firm, but are you starting to see that in other firms and peers around you?
Yeah, we are seeing a change. I think it's slower, especially in the bigger firms. As you know, like in any organization, change done well takes time. We were in a position where we could create a new culture from scratch based on my values. So I don't have the challenge of lots of partners to deal with who might not be aligned with those values. I don't have those challenges, but equally, I don't have a whole department to do it for me. So, there's pros and cons of doing it right from the beginning and changing an existing culture, but there's definitely a shift starting to happen, and it's positive. And I think certainly since the lockdowns, that's where we started to see more of the shift, because people were saying, I need to work more flexibly because I need a better work-life balance because I've seen the benefit to my family.
Yeah. Can I ask, have you seen a shift in terms of expectations from people, for example, that you're hiring? I was speaking to a recruiter recently, and they were telling me, I don't know how true this is. I was taking it based on what she was saying, but they were recruiting for positions in the centre of London, in the city, and they got one particular client who she didn't name, who apparently they're struggling to fill their positions, and their response was, well, put another 10,000 on the salary, then put more money on it, and that'll help. And it didn't help.
No,
the traditional way of just paying more money to get them through the door, that will work. Whereas actually what she was saying was her candidates were more likely to try and work for an organisation that met their values and invested more in well-being. Are you seeing some of that?
Yes, definitely seeing more of that again since the lockdowns. I think people have the time to kind of reevaluate, like, what's important to me, what's my purpose, like why am I doing what I'm doing? Often we get caught in this kind of rat race of, I'm at work, I'm at home, I'm at work, I'm at home, I'm sleeping, I'm eating, like, and we don't stop to think, like, why are we even doing this? And we're certainly seeing people. I'm getting approached by big city law firms in London asking people to join me, and I'm like, what, up here in Leeds? But actually, because we have that remote model, they can work from anywhere, and they know we can't pay those salaries, but they're happy with that, because when they work out pro rata how many hours they'll actually work, it's probably still getting paid more. We're working with us because they won't have to work till 3 a.m. and I won't ask them to sell their soul. So
yeah, that is so true. So true.
Oh, well, I love that. Well, well done you for being the voice and advocate for that, because it's needed in all industries, but that your industry in particular, it's an acute problem, isn't it? Amazing. All right, so in terms of your day-to-day life there at Thrive Law and what the culture of that looks like and what it's like for your workforce, like sounds like it's very enjoyable, but practically what does that look like, and what opportunities do they have in terms of making sure that their well-being is being looked after?
So for me, I mean, I always say start with the leadership team. So for me and the other more senior lawyers in the firm, it's all about us leading by example. So, making sure that we take breaks and we practice self-care, and we talk about that really openly. So even though everybody works remotely, we do have a bit of time in the office, but in fact, we were just talking before the podcast about, we use Teams, and it's about, making sure that we keep that connection and that communication up, but not to a point where we're micromanaging. So like on a lunchtime, I'll be like, oh, I'm going for a walk with the dogs, or I'll do a walking meeting, and just sharing some of those things to normalize it. Because I think, and certainly I saw this when some of my team joined from other firms, they felt really uncomfortable being flexible. Like it actually felt uncomfortable because they were like, I know you're my boss, but am I actually allowed to do this even though you're telling me? And it took them a really long time to not feel guilty about being flexible and working to suit them. But also, I think there's that element of accountability for them as well. Like they do work remotely. I can't check in and say, have you taken a break every 10 minutes? So there was really for me, teaching the team the importance of managing their own self-care and looking at self-awareness. So I created a journal, and I've given them all those journals. And we've also, in the one-to-ones that we do with the team, the focus is all around what's on your mind, what's your well-being, your workload. So we really have a very much a well-being focused one-to-one every month with me. And part of that is checking in on the things like that they've said they'll do. So one of an example might be one of the teams saying, oh, do you know what? I need to finish on time on this day because I know that I've got yoga, and I'm keeping them accountable on it. So rather than them just going, oh, I didn't go again. And it's like, well, they create their own timeframes, but it's making them accountable for that because I know it's important. So there's an element of educating them and creating that safe space for them to create an environment that works for them. But also from our perspective as managers, making sure that we're helping them to keep accountable, and we're also looking at what learning and development they need, because actually some people want to go to that next stage, other people don't, and it's not applying the same thing to every single person and really listening to what people need. And I think a lot of businesses fall short there because they just assume what everybody wants, and so there's a lot of listening happening as well.
Can I just jump in? I love the way that you're talking about that with like the accountability. I don't know why I've never heard it described exactly that way, but so it was on a previous podcast, I think, actually, and we were having a bit of a discussion around, and this has been something I've thought about for a while, like whether you mandate this stuff, right? Whether you should, in the same way that you would mandate safety, you mandate well-being, it's certain, like do not send an email after 5 p.m. or, things like this. But when it's well-being, that almost seems like, is that becoming a little too far to the point where it encroach on that? But you're talking about almost the middle ground there, if I'm hearing that correctly. It's not completely kind of just do what you want and manage your own well-being, but it's not mandating it and having rules. It's holding people accountable and supporting them to do that, I think. Because people need that, right?
They do. And sometimes people don't know kind of where to start because they've never had, and I get this comment all the time, they're like, I think at the beginning of the year I'd said to the team, okay, in your one-to-ones this year, I'm going to find out what your personal goals are. I want to know what you personally want to achieve this year, and I want to align your goals at Thrive with that, and I want to help facilitate it. And they were just like, no one's ever asked us that before. I don't even know what they are. So I was like, right, you need to work it out, because actually it's really important, because most people spend like majority of their time at work, and I want my team to enjoy being at work, because if they're happy, they're much more likely to stay, and obviously they're much less likely to be off sick, and also the clients are more likely to be happy. Like it's an absolute no-brainer. But, having that level of accountability, like I've always found, has been really helpful, because it's not then me telling them what to do, and it's also not them feeling like they haven't got support. It's a two-way thing, but it also promotes self-awareness. So, and I think that's something that often in businesses, it kind of goes back to this is more me putting my employer hat on, goes back to the employers have to do this, employers have to do that, employers have to do this. And actually, we're all responsible for our own well-being, and the employers are responsible for creating the culture and for, supporting the team within the workplace. But there's a lot of it, especially if we work from home, that we're responsible for as individuals. And so it's how do we get the best out of our people to ensure they do that? And one of the ways that we do that is through getting them to identify, like, what are their stressors, writing it all down, what is their self-care, and if they are struggling, ramping up that self-care when they know that the stresses are up. So just simple exercises that most employers probably wouldn't take the time to do, but it doesn't take very long. But it just definitely promote that more self-awareness and that accountability piece.
Yeah. Who holds you accountable, Jodie?
My coach.
But I mean, it does sound a bit like coaching, what you're saying. Like it's a form of coaching that can work within an organization, and
that's true.
It's really lovely to think that that's what organizations can be like. I mean, I imagine you're probably in the minority, sadly. And I'm thinking about trying to get a job at Thrive Law. But no, it's really special, because that is what we need as humans, right? We all need that. And many of us never access it in our lifetimes, right? Or we go through huge things in our lives, but we never access support of any kind. And work and our employer, they're such a big stakeholder in our lives that it makes sense that there would be something, some form of structure, some form of support to help with this stuff, and it has to align with what we've got going on personally. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense. But that vision is hard to instill, isn't it? And put in place, I think.
You mentioned psychological safety briefly, like you whizzed by it in the intro. Did
that get you excited, Matt?
Yeah, that did excite me. So I guess for the listeners, what exactly did you mean by that? And also, probably more interestingly, like, how do you create that within your company?
Yeah, so let's start with what do I mean by it? So when we talk about psychological safety, it's really about us as individuals feeling that it's safe to be in the workplace. So that encompasses quite a few different things. Obviously, there's the environment that you're in, the hours that you work. It's that culture piece, really, for me, and making sure that we don't have practices in place that damage that psychological safety, or put me in a position where I feel like I'm going to burn out, or so I suppose the way that I did that was going back to the point about flexibility, allowing that flexibility and not putting in practices such as billable hours, so that, for me, I think they're damaging for people's mental health. That's my personal view. Some firms don't agree with me. However, the data from law care is really clear that is one of the biggest stresses for most lawyers, and that's what causes them to have burnout and anxiety and depression, because actually they just can't handle it. It's too much. So that's one part of it. And then it's the other piece is the support and the management around that as well. So creating that open environment that people feel they can open up if they are struggling, because you can't stop people from struggling. It doesn't matter what you do, people will always have good and bad days. They might be struggling with things outside of work, but still making sure that there is those point of contact. Every single person at Thrive is an MHFA trained mental health first aider. So basically have that understanding, not just from internal perspective, but also the clients they might be dealing with. We're dealing with people who have lost their jobs, often with mental health problems, often suicidal. So making sure that people have the skill set and the environment in which to open up and support each other, as well as actually keeping me accountable as well. When you go back to that point about accountability, the team will also check in on me, and it's such a nice feeling, because actually as a leader you are quite lonely at the top. Like, there isn't always that support, and I'm really lucky with my team because they will check in on me and they'll know if I'm not great, I'm really open about that, and they know what makes me feel better, and they'll help me with that as well. And I think when you start to get to know people and you put these things in place, like everybody genuinely cares. And I think that's the biggest difference, is you're not just there doing a job, like you're creating that culture where people genuinely care about how other people feel, and so they are more conscious about their actions and their behaviors. And then another way that we helped create psychological safety was around, we have these things called a license to thrive. So this is our license to thrive at work. And it's really about getting people to show up as their true self, but it also encompasses all of the things that we need. So I've got anxiety, and I've had PTSD, and I've also got ADHD. So one of the challenges for me is that, you know, I can be very up and down. My communication can be very different to someone who's neurotypical. So the license to thrive summarizes like what motivates me, what demotivates me, how I communicate best, what adjustments I need, my style, all of those things. And everybody has one. So we use those to help people, especially because we're all remote, to get to know each other better and create a safer environment, rather than just assuming we all work in the same way, because we don't.
Oh, I love that. That's amazing. License to thrive. It actually reminds me, I do a tiny bit of clinical work in physiotherapy, and there's a patient document that's called This Is Me. It's often used in a clinical setting for
I've
patients.
seen it. Yeah, I've seen it before.
Like dementia or Alzheimer's, or something that might mean that it's harder for them to communicate who they are. But it's so important. That's such an important piece of documentation, because you can very quickly understand who that person is a little bit more, and like how to, even just like what name to call them. You know, because it makes a difference to how someone feels if you're kind of being very formal using their full name, but actually they go by like a whole different name. It makes such a difference if you use the right name. Definitely. So love that. Really nice. License to thrive.
Yeah, it has worked. You know, it's actually worked really well. And recently the team have even suggested like, oh, we've done something around motivating factors and like values, and they're like, oh, can we put that in our license to thrive and redo them for the next team meeting? So it's really nice. And it's also helped when people have come back from maternity leave, because then when new people are there, they can read those license to thrive. We then can have a team meeting about it. And we've done like silly games, like, you know, working out which is a fact, which is a lie, and all that stuff. And it just helps people get to know each other, which I think when you are working in a remote environment, you do need to make more of an effort, because you don't pick those little facts up and in those little conversations that you did when you're in the office.
Yeah. What's the format of them? Are they like a document? Are they held somewhere centrally, or?
Yeah, so we've created them in as a PowerPoint, and they're all saved on our, so you know, on Teams you can have channels, so we put them on there, so if anyone updates them, then they can see it's been updated. We did used to just save them on the OneDrive, but obviously you don't know if someone's updated it then. But I'm actually building some tech, and the tech that we're building is an employee experience platform, and that the concept of these will be embedded within the technology. So it kind of is part of that, and it links in with a diversity and inclusion and a wellbeing diagnostic. So all of the AI will work together, so that, you know, how, you know, if you've got it in a document, someone has to read it, the tech will kind of prompt you, oh, that person doesn't, you know, do video calls because of this. Why don't you try doing a walking meeting with them? So that's the idea behind the tech, is that it will hopefully reduce the human error and like our forgetfulness around some of these things.
No,
I can see you thinking now.
No, I'm thinking it's great. Wish we'd thought of that, right?
It's personalization, isn't it? It's like every time, I think as these conversations are going on, as we're having more conversations with people, it's sounding like more and more that actually what is effective is getting more personal and understanding who people really, really are. One of the things Fiona was saying in the podcast with Circus Street, Fiona Berry, was one of her favorite things that they do, activities that they have as a team, the most successful ones are the ones that are really like employees are asked to kind of bring their hobby or their something from their culture into work to share. So it might be that actually on the side I do a bit of poetry, and so then I bring in an opportunity for us to like share some poems or something like that. And I just thought that's really nice, like really getting into the bones of who your workforce are and who your colleagues are. It's very like connecting, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it. The tech is going to be called connections. So there you go.
You did tell me that, but I definitely didn't remember that.
Yeah, no, I don't think you did.
But there we go. You've obviously done a very good job of appropriately branding it and finding a name. Amazing. Matt.
Well, I'm really interested in the industry. I know we've already kind of touched on it, but I've got 1,000 more questions about it. Do you think so? You talked about the kind of the traditional way of doing things, and that's what pervades in some of these other companies. Do you think it's just that? Do you think here's a theory for you? So tell me it's wrong. Do you think, I don't know, like maybe the legal industry is inherently dealing with more miserable things? I don't know. Is there as much good news in law? You know, when especially like some areas like insolvency, there's very few really positive insolvency stories. I'm sure there are some.
Yeah. Do you know what? That is a really good point. And one of the areas when so when I talk about Law Care, they're a charity that specialise in research and support for lawyers with mental health. So I'm one of their champions. So obviously, like, their research is the most helpful because it's industry specific. And they did do some research around just looking at, you know, what is it about lawyers, like why do they get so, you know, so stressed, and what, you know, what is it about our profession? And part of it is the personalities that we are, like lots of perfectionists, people, like we want to help people, so we're going over and above all the time. Like it's that kind of, like, a lot of people become lawyers because of that, and so they're probably doing it to themselves a lot of the time because they just want to help. Then you've also got the perfectionist side, so it's like it's not finished, it's perfectly done. And then you've got the type of work, and a lot of people, especially where you're dealing with a lot of trauma, you see this with I have a friend who does a lot of cases in care, and she has to deal with like children who've been sexually assaulted by their families, and you know, every day, and she's like, this is really hard, like I don't know if I can do this forever because all I read is this stuff, and it's emotionally very, very draining. So I think there's that piece as well, and the same when you see other types of trauma. I think that, you know, you almost absorb that because you're dealing with it every day. And then also those people that you're speaking to are deeply upset, you know, they're very emotional, often have their own mental health problems. So as lawyers, and I was actually talking to someone about this the other day, but as lawyers, sometimes I feel like people will just offload all their stuff onto you, and you're like, and obviously we're not the counsellor, we're not therapists in any way, but especially, I mean, certainly for what we do in employment law, if someone's left their job, like they just offload like everything, absolutely everything, and you know, you have to then decipher the relevant bits of information out of that, and often you're taking on a lot more. And you know, we've had to deal with loads of people who've been suicidal, who've, you know, really had awful mental breakdowns, and part of that is linked to why they left their job, and they're really struggling to fight it. And that's, again, you take that on because you really want to help them. So I do think there is a lot of that in the profession. There's a few different things. I did a talk actually a few years ago in Prague, and it was all around like why we think lawyers particularly are not necessarily prone to mental ill health, but you do find that it's very, very high, the amount of lawyers who struggle with their mental health.
Yeah. What is in place then? You know, like you talk about, you know, you're not a therapist, but if you were a therapist, you would have some form of supervision, some form of process. Does the industry have a standard for that?
What, in terms of like the advice that we give and the support?
No, for you as the professional handling that. So say you are working like very, you know, quite cases that are very alarming or distressing. You know, what are there formal things in place to help you manage that, or is it just mental health first aid? And
yeah, so probably exactly what you're just saying there. Like, it would only be if the firm have put something in place. You can reach out to Law Care. They do have a helpline, so they have the ability for people to speak to somebody, but it would be very much on the firm to put that in place. And I think that's where the challenge is, because, you know, firms maybe don't see it in the same way. And it probably back in the day when they were training wasn't what you did. So it's not something that they're going to do now because I had to do it this way. So why should they get this, toughen up kind of thing. And that's really a lot of the attitudes of a lot of senior partners in some of the firms is like, well, we didn't have that support then. So why do they need it now? Obviously times have changed. And the other thing I would say is now we email everything. I can spend like 10 hours drafting a document, send it to a client, they'll come back in 3 minutes. And I'm like, it's back. Yeah. But, before we used to send things in the post and we'd have a week to, and so you think that the volume of information that we're expected to process is ridiculous. And then we also have to build a personal brand and we have to, deal with emails, telephone calls, WhatsApp groups, Teams channels, Asana boards. Like there's all these different forms of communication. And before we just had like a phone and a post room. So but you see the difference.
Yeah.
So,
I was going to ask you about that. I literally wrote down the thing about, well, I had to do, I went through this, so they need to, whether that like encourages the culture to stick, and I guess it needs positive role models like yourself who say, well, I've been through that and I don't want anyone else to go through that in that same way, because I just want a more positive future for people. But shifting that sort of behavior will be really, really important, won't it?
definitely.
Do you remember?
Yeah. And also people have forgotten how they felt, I went through that and I made it. And it's like, well, yeah, but if you could go back and remember how you felt, you wouldn't want to do it again. But hindsight's a wonderful thing, right? You kind of come through it and you think, oh, it wasn't that bad. But it was. When you were there, you've just forgotten about it. It's like a defense mechanism, I guess.
Yeah.
Do you remember though, Matt, we did speak once to a young lawyer and she actually wanted that as a rite of passage. She wanted to burn the candle at both ends. And I mean, I don't know if she still wants that now and how long that lasted, but in that moment, that was an aspirational thing for her as a young new lawyer. She was like, I want to prove myself in this way. She was also an advocate for well-being. She was like, I've got the energy, I've got the desire, but it's my choice to do it. So that also was a bit confusing. I was like, okay, so you have to remember that there's also just a different mix of people, but there's also like duty of care, right? And making sure that she survives that process, gets inside and still wants to be in her career.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I was really blown away by that.
We need to ask you about the role. So you find with these roles of well-being leaders within organizations, people who are trying to improve the well-being of others. It's almost like passion is a prerequisite, right? We're all passionate about the subject. What else do you need, and what else has helped you to encourage this within the organization?
Well, it was really for me about making sure that the right people joined, so that it wasn't, I'm not just forcing everybody to do the things that I think are right. It was getting the right people to join in, and what I mean by that is making sure that they align with the values, so that they're not then telling people to do things that are against those values, and there's no practices being put in place that actually damage the work that we've done. And I think the other thing, I don't know, I suppose for me as well, it's not actually all my ideas. Like, then it's not all me, like it's the team. And I make sure that I ask the team about, if there's any things that I'm thinking to put on from a wellbeing perspective and diversity inclusion. In fact, anything in the business, like processes, everything, I actually run stuff past them. And it's not that, every decision in the business I run past them, but it's a collaborative effort. And I want their buy-in. I want to know, is this actually going to help you? And I think sometimes we just assume what people want, and that's not the right way to do wellbeing. Because we're just like, I love yoga. Anyone that knows me knows how much I love yoga. I'm doing headstands all over LinkedIn, right? I love it. However, forcing everybody to do yoga is not the right thing for well-being. Yes, it will benefit them if they do it in the right environment, but we need to understand like what are people's needs, and that's me as a kind of well-being lead, and in that role, it's for me to listen and for me to really take that feedback on board. Rather than just kind of go, well, this helped me. Yeah, okay. Some of that stuff might help other people, but there might be other things that are there in my blind spots. So I think I answered the question then.
Yeah, no, the listing's really key. Yeah, and also with two absolute yoga enthusiasts and me not being able to touch my toes, then I can empathise. Yeah. So what do you think's helped you kind of progress your career? I don't know, like, have you received any really good advice? You mentioned you've got a coach.
Yeah.
Are there practices that you use as to progress your career in well-being? I know it's not solely your career, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, so definitely surrounding myself with people who I can learn from. Like, I know that I don't know everything. I mean, for me, I've always been really curious, so I read lots. I'm always listening to like podcasts and looking at different audiobooks and books that I can get into. Even when I'm walking the dog, I always like to absorb more information. But also having mentors and speaking at events, then getting to know the speakers and that type of thing, like just asking questions. I'm that annoying person that asks everybody all the questions. And that's really helped me because I'm not afraid. I think some people are quite a fixed mindset, and that's really challenging because well-being's like a journey. Like, you don't just get there and you've nailed it. Like, there's always something new that's happening. So being mindful of that and looking at, like I said before about technology, like looking at tech, how can tech assist with that? And not being afraid to acknowledge the blind spots and the challenges, because nothing is perfect. So yeah, I think like the mentors have been really helpful, like where I found people who are willing to, just bounce ideas off. And I think ultimately a lot, especially in the mental health and wellbeing space, there's a lot of people just want to share best practice, and I think that's really great. Because it's all for kind of the greater good, and like things like this where yeah, exactly, there's plenty to go around, and I think that's people definitely see that a lot more in this space, I think. And also through I don't know if you've seen the This Is Me campaign across the UK. Actually, it's in India and Scotland as well now, but that's all around storytelling for leaders within organisations around their mental health. So when I launched that in Yorkshire, it was already a national campaign, but I just launched in the region. What that meant was we got a committee together, and then there was loads of other people who really cared about this stuff. So then we all started doing stuff together, and we created a bit of a community. And I think that tends to be what happens with people who are passionate about this area. Like, this isn't my job. I'm a solicitor, but I just really love the idea of being able to be innovative and to make a real impact on people in the workplace, because it just aligns with the type of thing that I suppose, like the culture that I've created, but also the type of thing that I actually wanted to deliver when I first set my firm up. So being able to merge those two things together, it's like my passion and my profession is like, I mean, everyone wants to do that, right?
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Really amazing. So Jodie, what does your you've mentioned yoga, what does your and dog walking, what does your kind of well-being practice look like for yourself?
So every day people are going to cringe at this, but every day I get up about 4:45 and I'm just like, but I just work better in the morning. And also I like to block my time out in the morning. Every morning, for an hour in the morning is my time. Like, that's my time. So I'll either gym or yoga, and then I also walk the dog. So usually get about 2 hours before everybody's up. And the reason I like to do it before 9 is because then I'm not interrupted. And because I have ADHD, I am very distracted. So as soon as I start, like, if I go on my phone first thing, I will just be off on one, and I'll be on social media and doing emails. And then all of a sudden it's lunchtime and I'm like, oh, so I do have to be really structured. And that's part of my self-care routine, is actually blocking hours in my day to do certain things, including my own personal stuff. So I actually have dog walks blocked out in my diary because if I don't block it out, one, people will put meetings in, but two, I'll just get carried away because I'm so passionate about what I do. I just kind of forget, and then I'm like, oh God, I haven't done any of my self-care. So that was, for me, it was about being a bit stricter with myself and blocking that time out. Journaling, really important. Again, that self-awareness and reflecting, because sometimes we're all guilty of it. We kind of focus on all the negative stuff, and you might have an amazing day and one person's really annoyed you and one thing went wrong, and that's all you focus on. So that helps me to practice gratitude and just to be more self-aware. Like, could I have done something differently in situations? Because like, none of us are perfect. And then exercise. I know I mentioned yoga, but I also do a lot of I do like weightlifting and netball, and I'm always into something like surfing and all sorts of stuff. So I'm that annoying person with lots of energy. So yeah, I have to expend it, otherwise I don't sleep. So I'm always doing something. But I love it. And I think that's it. I've tried to create a lifestyle now where I can do that. So I can travel and work from anywhere, and which means I can go on a surf trip and surf every day, work every day. So it doesn't mean that I'm taking a million holidays, which is what everybody thinks. But actually it means I can have the flexibility to do the things that I know make me feel better.
Yeah, love that. What was before you worked some of these things out, like around boundaries and how to manage your ADHD, and what was life like before that? I know you said you had a breakdown, but has it been a slow journey? Have you?
So life before that was just working, I think, pretty much. Like I've always been into like fitness and yoga, but it's always the first thing that drops, isn't it, when you're busy and you think, oh, just one more email, and then you miss the class. And I think when you're in an environment where you feel you have to stay because the partners are there, like you're always going to put yourself last. So for me, it's actually been a really long journey, and through quite a lot of therapy. I only recently got diagnosed with ADHD, so a lot of a journey around that acceptance piece of that as well. And just kind of understanding like what works, what doesn't work, and just being more self-aware as well, because I think when I had the breakdown, I didn't even know that was happening. Like I knew I had anxiety, I knew I had panic attacks, and I knew all of that stuff, but I didn't have any idea that I was downward spiraling. I knew I didn't feel well, but I'd kind of always not felt like that. So it was one of those things, whereas now, as soon as if I don't exercise for 2 days, I'm like, I can feel it. Like, it's just like, I don't know, I feel so much more razor focused with that. And I suppose I had to go through that to appreciate it as well. So whilst it was a really, really awful time, it gave me such perspective. And weirdly, I wouldn't take it back as well, because actually I wouldn't be where I am today, and I wouldn't have that perspective and that awareness. So yeah, it's definitely been a challenge. And to be honest, I still haven't got it right. Like some days I still do get distracted and I'm like, oh, it's like 8 p.m. I need to log off. But again, that is something that will always happen, because I know that that's my personality type. And if I hyper focus on something, like I can just come out of this bubble and I'm like, oh, it's been 4 hours. Oh, better turn that computer off. So I do have to put things like alarms and that on, but it's definitely a continual journey, but I'm getting better.
Yeah. And
if it's 8 p.m. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Go for it, Alicia.
No, I was just going to say, if you've got the awareness, that you can bring it back, right? Because we can't be perfect all the time. We don't always go up the well-being.
Yeah.
So we know how to save ourselves. That's a big part of it, isn't it?
It's definitely a big part of it. And it's also that whole piece of being kind. I used to be so hard on myself. Like I think that's the very lawyer thing. It's like, I've got to be the best, and actually I'm not going to be the best all the time. And I've mentioned a few times I'm not perfect. And I do repeat that a lot, because I know as leaders, like people look at us and go, you've got it all sorted. I absolutely don't. And I think that's the one of the strongest messages a lot of leaders can give, is that they might look like on social media and in the office, like, oh, they've got it sorted. And the reality is we're all human and we all make mistakes and we're all on a journey still. And the whole reason I set Thrive is that I want to enjoy that journey, rather than just feeling like all I do is work and not enjoying the work environment. It's like, part of that environment is part of my life. It's part of who I am. And that's really important for me to make sure that stays true to my values now, because I've done all the hard work now. It's as we grow, like making sure that we stay true to that.
I love it. That's the psychological safety, right? They say one of the best ways to build that is by being fallible and vulnerable yourself. So people around you don't feel like they need to be perfect as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's a big thing in the legal sector around, mistakes. So obviously we're highly regulated, and often we've seen, I don't know if you've seen it in the media, where like junior lawyers have made a mistake, they've covered it up because they were scared to tell their boss, and then they've been sacked and struck off. So we have a huge thing around there's an example today where someone sent an email, it was the wrong name of a person. They just called them the wrong name, and they were so embarrassed, but they told the team and was like, said, oh, I can tell you a time when I actually introduced someone as the wrong name in court to a judge. And actually just normalizing that we've all done it. And that, of course, that's not negligence, but the reality being the more comfortable people feel to be a bit vulnerable, then the less likely they are to hide that and then have that impact on their mental health.
Yeah, I worked with a firm a few years, this is going back a few years now, and they did something they called the Church of Fail. So they all had to stand up at the end of every week and say one thing they'd failed at that week. And
I love that.
it was everything from little things like, put the wrong, CC'd in the wrong person on an email. But then there were really interesting, like, personal things. Like I didn't say thanks to a colleague, and I just took something off them and ran with it, but didn't say thanks. And a lot of it comes, especially when you're working remotely, that sort of connection's key, isn't it?
That's a nice one. We'll have to start making a little list of these nice little initiatives, that are kind of just, they're free. It costs nothing to do that, does it? But it's just a communication thing. Right, Jodie, before we unleash you to Friday evening, tell us a bit about Thrive Law and the services you provide, particularly within this space, how you help companies. Obviously, you're huge advocates of mental health first aid.
Yeah.
Can you give us a quick summary in 2 minutes?
Yeah, of course. So obviously we do all the employment law stuff, but we also help with training, strategy. So, if you want help with these types of initiatives, like how to do the training, where to start, how to do the comms, so it aligns with the law. So we make sure that, you are legally protected, but also looking at how we might infiltrate that into your policies, your processes, your one-to-ones, all of that stuff. So everything from the hardcore legal litigation all the way down to, right at the beginning of just onboarding someone, getting to know them, the people skills, how to have difficult conversations, all of that stuff as well. So the full spectrum. And we also do HR packages to help businesses with fixed fees so that it's really manageable and they feel they can just reach out to us at any time and we're not big, scary lawyers.
No, not scary at all. In fact, it sounds like a joy to work with you. Amazing.
I really want to ask Alethea to Jodie, is there a question you wish we'd asked you today that we haven't?
What do you
that is throwing you on the spot there. I know it's a difficult one.
I don't know, actually.
Yeah.
It's
almost like what do you not normally get asked that you wish would come up in these things?
I'm trying to think. Let me have a think of because people always, I suppose people always ask around like the journey and stuff. So it's like that's kind of covered off. But I don't know if there's like I don't know. I think you've covered loads there.
Okay. You'll have to come back for part 2.
Yeah, we will. Yeah,
definitely. We'd love to do some workshops and things with you, Jodie, as well for this Working Well community. So we'll have to have a chat about those things. So how do we find you? How does everyone find you? We find you on LinkedIn, Instagram.
Yeah, so I'll send you links for LinkedIn. It's just Jody Hill on LinkedIn, and then on all of the socials it's at I am Jody Hill and at Thrive_law and I'm even on TikTok. So I know, right? Who even am I?
We want to see a dance. Shouldn't there be?
No. It's not a lawyer dancing thing. there's a lot of my dogs like stealing my tea off my desk and things like that.
You can take your dogs to work to the office, can you?
Yeah, well, when I'm working from home or like when sometimes at the office as well. But yeah, they're little thieves. They're just like, they love cups of tea. Who knew?
Oh, that's very sweet. I'm happy too. Well-being for dogs.
Yeah. It's like dog therapy though. Like that's one of the things that actually I talk a bit about is dogs and how helpful that is to like switch off as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a big thing, isn't it? But in healing is using doggy therapy. I think they make most people very happy, don't they? Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
No, thank you.
Yeah, it's been really inspirational.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was going to say you best get to bed because you're
up
at 4 a.m. So.
What time do you go to bed? If you get
actually, this is something that people I like to know. I usually go to bed between 9:30 and 10, and then so that's still like about 7 hours, 6.5. I need between 6 and 7 hours. That's what I need. So, yeah.
So how do you watch the end of Love Island? That makes sense.
You know what? I don't watch TV.
Oh,
I know, I'm like a weird person. So I say I don't watch TV. The only time I watch TV is if like someone says, "Oh, have you seen this program or whatever?" and I'll put it on like Netflix. But I don't actually have normal TV. I just have Netflix. or like Amazon Prime or whatever it's called. But yeah, I never ever sit and watch TV. And this year, what I've started doing more as well is like, rather than, so when I sit down on the sofa, I'll just sit with the dogs with a book. I never used to read much because of ADHD. Like I could never read more than 2 pages without like getting distracted by something. But now I've started getting into reading more. So yeah.
Love that. No, you've inspired me not to put our television on.
I know, I'm literally looking at it right now as well. I'm thinking, when did I last watch you? Although I did watch Emily in Paris the other weekend, and I was like,
that's it. Television can be a good little bit of escapism now and again.
Yeah.
Amazing. Oh, well, I hope you enjoy your weekend ahead, Jodie. Thank you so much for your time. We've really enjoyed it. And we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
See ya.